We are joined on the phone today by writer-actor George McGrath, member of the Groundlings and also a big part of Pee-wee's Playhouse. Hey, George, how you doing today?
I'm good. How about you?
I am doing well, and thank you so much for joining me.
Of course.
Well, first of all, what have you been up to as of late? Have you been staying busy over the last year or so? I know a lot of stuff has been going on here for the last year, but some people are finding ways to stay busy.
I'm doing a lot of teaching. I teach college, I teach writing TV shows, and I'm teaching voiceover acting as well on Zoom. I don't mind it. I kind of like teaching on Zoom.
Yeah, that would seem maybe difficult for some people, as far as teaching, being expressive and acting and all that. It seems like something maybe that would be better in person, but you're figuring it out over Zoom. That's great.
I think a lot of things are better in person, like improv and even acting classes really are better in person, but I'm teaching writing and voiceover, and they seem to work really well on Zoom.
So is that through a university, or is that something maybe the listeners could sign up for a class?
I teach voiceover through the Groundlings. I've been doing it to raise money for them during the pandemic. People could go to groundlings.com and sign up for the class if they want to. The other I teach for the New York Film Academy, so that's just for students that go there.
Awesome. And I saw online too that there was a film maybe coming out called Bloody Hands. Is that still in the works? Or?
That is the craziest thing. I get questions about it all the time. I literally had nothing to do with that movie. A student wrote it, and they said, "Can we use your name so it will get, ratings on IMDb?" Or I'm not exactly sure what the reason was, but it's been on there for like 5 years as a film that's in production. So people ask me all the time, when's your film Bloody Hands coming out? And I said, I have nothing to do with it at all. So it's a crazy credit on there.
All right. Yeah, it says now it's in post-production, and it was written by George McGrath.
There you go. I imagine I'll be invited to the premiere, and I can tell you more about it if it ever happens.
Well, George, you mentioned the Groundlings. Can you talk a bit about your days with them? It seems like the relationships you made there really kind of sent you on the paths you eventually took in your career. And, as you mentioned, you're still working with them.
I was an actor, and when I got into the Groundlings, I started writing stuff for myself. It's all sketches, and the more you write, the more stuff you're in the show. And it turned out to be something that I was good at, writing sketches. And I first got a job offered to write a show that was called Kids Incorporated. That's how I got into the Writers Guild. The producer of that show came and asked me to write. I guess I wrote like maybe 10 episodes of it. And then Paul Rubens came when he had his Playhouse deal with CBS. And he had been in the Groundlings years before, but I had never met him. And he came to see a show, and he asked me if I wanted to write a kid show, and that totally turned my career around. Pee-wee's Playhouse was such a big deal when it came out that people were saying, get me one of those hip happening writers from Pee-wee's Playhouse. And in the second season, it was just me and Paul, and he wasn't going to go do anything else. So I was the hip happening writer from Pee-wee's Playhouse, and I got my own TV show on Nick at Night from it, and it really set my career off as a comedy writer.
So was it the writing that was always kind of the thing you wanted to gravitate towards? I know you've done acting as well, but it seems like the writing is really your passion.
The acting was what I wanted, was what I thought my career would be, and then the writing just became something where people were coming asking me to do it rather than me trying to get jobs as an actor. And, I continued to act my whole career. I was little parts in things that I wrote, I had parts in. But the writing became a full-time, lucrative career, and it just sort of took over.
Well, this is maybe an odd question, but as a writer who also can act, do you have the same satisfaction when you write something and somebody else does it and it becomes, a memorable thing or a big hit? Or do you ever think like, man, I could have probably did the acting for that too? Or does that ever cross your mind?
Not really, because I haven't really written. I write mostly, I don't want to say I wrote mostly for women, but I kind of do. Most of the things I've written are parts for women. Like I wrote Tracey Takes On with Tracy Ullman for a couple of years.
Sure.
And, you know, that was super satisfying just because she was so great. And, you know, she made everything you wrote seem so much better than it was. I don't think I've ever written something where I thought, gee, I wish I had been in that. I don't think I have really.
Well, of course, you mentioned Pee-wee's Playhouse, and, you know, a lot of the Groundlings wound up working on that show as well. And, you know, the impact that that show had on people, you know, over the years it was on was humongous. You know, people my age definitely hugely influenced by it for sure.
It's one of those things that I think the timing was right, and it was unusual enough to really sort of make a mark. And to this day, you know, there are so many Pee-wee Playhouse Facebook groups and fan clubs and all that. I mean, I still get, you know, the occasional email from somebody telling me how much they love Pee-wee's Playhouse. And I have the theme song on YouTube, and it has like 1 billion views, and people still are interested in it for some reason.
Well, and I think maybe having all the people from the Groundlings come over, maybe you already had that sort of relationship, you know, instead of just being thrown onto a set with new people. I mean, obviously Phil Hartman was a genius, and, you know, all the writers and everybody that was involved with it. I think it really showed that you guys were, you know, friends off camera as well.
Phil Hartman was just about the greatest guy I ever knew. He was so funny and smart and kind and generous with his talent. When I first got in the Groundlings, he was like an established star over there, and he was so good to me. And I loved Phil Hartman so much. The other people that came from the Groundlings, Lynn Stewart, who was Miss Yvonne, and the first season, John Paragon also wrote it, and then he played Jambi. And the rest of the people, I think, were cast when we were in New York, most of the ones for the first season. And then the second season, when we moved to California, some of those were replaced with people that were local to L.A. But yeah, I had not known Paul beforehand, but we became very close. I ended up writing Big Top Pee-wee with him, and did a bunch of different things. And, you know, Paul was just sort of a one-of-a-kind, you know, genius in a freaky way. You know, he just knew what he wanted, and he had just an eye for how things look. You know, I always tell a story that if a pencil was out of place in the pencil case holder on the set, he would notice it. You know, he just had really an eye for what he wanted things to look like. And, yeah, I mean, it was all him. I did a show a couple of years later called Riders in the Sky, also for CBS Saturday morning. And it was similar in that it had puppets, and it was, you know, crazy, but it was about cowboys, this group called Riders in the Sky. And what it lacked was Paul. You know, Paul, if you look at any episode of that show, Paul is the center of every bit of energy about it. I mean, other people were fantastic in the cast, but Paul's energy is what made that show so special. And that's why it could never really be reproduced by other people who tried to do similar things.
Well, you, of course, were the voice of Globey. He was always my favorite Playhouse character. I don't know, it's just something about the voice you gave him always cracked me up.
Well, you're in a small group right there. But yeah. Yeah, I was Globey, I was the fish, I was the Cowntess, I was a flower. The second season, I was Terry. It was fun for me because I was not a puppeteer by any stretch of the imagination, and I had to become a puppeteer. The other people were legit puppeteers when they came onto it, you know, Wayne White and Rick Heitzman and Allison Mork. So I had to sort of learn how to be a puppeteer on the fly. It was, depending on the puppet, Globey had sort of a remote control gizmo that made him move, and it was erratic, to say the least. You know, you'd be pushing the buttons, and Globey had a mind of his own, and he'd just start spinning around or something. But yeah, it was fun for me.
Well, George, I got to ask you your memories of making the Christmas special. That's been a holiday staple for so many people over the years. And, you know, my son and I watch it probably, you know, half a dozen times a year, even, you know, during the summer, it seems.
Oh, wow. You know, it was amazing because just every star in the world that were people that Paul loved were the sort of the same people that I loved because they were from my childhood as well. So, Frankie and Annette. One of the highlights of my life was meeting Cher, who I was a big, giant fan of course. And Paul knew I was a big fan of hers, and I was like too shy to go over to her, and he dragged me over, sat me down with her, and I got a picture with her. And I had brought my Cher doll because I knew she was coming, and I was going to have her sign it. So I sit next to Cher, and he takes a picture, and I said, and I had the doll, and I said, I'm a big fan. And she goes, well, I guess so. Or not everybody carries the doll around. And it was just, I still love that picture so much. And just so many people were on that show. It was just fantastic to be a part of it.
Well, and you also wrote Big Top Pee-wee, you mentioned, with Paul. I feel like that film maybe wasn't given a fair shake at the time. Do you think people were just maybe expecting Pee-wee's Playhouse on the big screen when that came out?
I think more so they were expecting Pee-wee's Big Adventure.
Sure.
Because that was such a big hit. I think it's funny because there's a small group that prefer that to Pee-wee's Big Adventure, and I hear from them, of course. And I think it was just a different kind of a movie, and people weren't really expecting that, or they thought it was going to be a sequel, or to Big Adventure, or to the Playhouse somehow. And, there were no characters that went from one to the other. It was fun to write it, and it wasn't exactly what I hoped it would be, but, there's still some very funny parts of it. And, I think it's imaginative, and, I think a lot of people enjoy it, think it's a good movie.
Yeah, definitely. As time goes on, I really appreciate it more than maybe I did when I was a kid. But, as you mentioned, it's got to be tough writing that. You can't just say, oh, Pee-wee lost his bike again. I mean, obviously, you got to go in a whole nother direction when you're doing it.
Yeah. People ask me if it was ever discussed to make it a sequel or have the bike in it or have Dottie or Francis in it. And it wasn't. It was always, Paul had some very certain ideas that he wanted to have included in the movie. The hot dog tree. He wanted to have the longest kiss in movie history, and he did. Things like that. And I think the world of the circus, he grew up in Sarasota, Florida, so that's the summer place for the Ringling Brothers Circus. So he had sort of a love of the circus, I guess, or keen interest at least in the circus. So I think that's why he said it there. I don't think he ever thought of it as a sequel or, anything that had anything to do with the other things that he had going on at the same time.
Well, George, you've definitely done a lot of things over your career, acting, of course, and lots of writing. Puppetry, you mentioned, directing. And, I didn't know until I started digging around that you've got a lot of songwriting credits under your belt as well.
I do have a lot of songwriting credits because, and that was another thing, that the Pee-wee's Playhouse theme song, Paul just took me in his dressing room and he said, do you want to write the theme song? Because I had done a lot of song improv at the Groundlings and, picking up stuff on the spot. He said, do you want to write the theme song? And I said, sure. I said, what do you want? And he sort of stood up and demonstrated, come on in and put yourself up a chair. And then he gave me that line. I went back to my hotel room and I wrote the theme song. And I sang it into a tape recorder, and I thought, well, I'm not going to use this tune. But they did. The same tune that I sang into the tape recorder, and it's probably the longest theme song ever in any TV show, but it was a great credit. And then when I had my show on the television, Nick at Night, I wrote dozens of songs. I wrote a song for the soap opera Santa Barbara. I wrote a song for Elvira's MTV special. So I've gotten to write a bunch of songs over the years with We'll Get Through. The Pee-wee's Playhouse theme song was Mark Mothersbaugh, and Paul and I share credit on it. But yeah, it's been sort of a fun secondary career. I still get residuals from the songs and this and that. So it was great.
Awesome. Well, I know you mentioned you're still teaching and working with the Groundlings. Is there anything else maybe in the works or some other stuff we should be looking out for?
I don't know. I never say never. So, hopefully there'll be something that somebody asks me to do. I'm not really sort of driven to search things out, but I have a lot of kids with their scripts, and if somebody asks me to do an acting thing, I'd be happy to do it. I still occasionally perform with the Groundlings. I'm doing one of their Zoom shows. And yeah, so, I'm not like saying, oh no, I don't ever want to do anything, but I'm also sort of elderly. So if something comes up, I'll say yes, but I'm not like sort of, I have a manager, but she knows my sort of reluctance to pursue things. So, just sort of.
George, again, I am a huge fan of yours, and it's been an honor speaking with you today. Thank you so much.
I appreciate you asking, Dustin. It's been a pleasure.
And again, that was actor, writer George McGrath, formerly of the Groundlings, and of course, Pee-wee's Playhouse. And look for him coming up here. He's teaching some classes, so sign up and get a class with George McGrath.